On Christmas Eve, I found my grandson shivering outside in the snow while his family laughed by the fire inside. 6 words froze the room. You left him out to die. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't leaving quietly. I was about to burn their lies down. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Snow crunched under Henry's boots as he walked up the icy path to his daughter's house on Christmas Eve. He carried 2 gifts under one arm, breath rising in white clouds against the night air. The glow of holiday lights blinked cheerfully across the porch, wreaths and ribbons announcing warmth and celebration inside. But what stopped him cold wasn't the decorations. It was Liam. His grandson sat on the steps in a thin shirt, no coat, arms wrapped tightly around himself. His lips were pale, tinged blue, and his shoulders shook with tremors too violent to be blamed on excitement. He looked up at Henry with a weak, fragile smile, the kind a child forces when they are ashamed of something that isn't their fault. Henry's heart clenched. Through the frosted windows, he could see the dining room bathed in golden light. Laughter drifted out, clinking glasses, the soft glow of a fire flickering in the hearth. Plates of food were passed, and voices rose in easy cheer. His family, his daughter, her husband, their relatives, warm, full, comfortable. And here, on the porch, sat the boy who should have been at the head of that table. Henry dropped the gifts into the snow without caring where they landed. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around Liam's shaking frame. When the boy whispered, "I'm not allowed inside," something hot surged in Henry's chest, hotter than the bitter wind tearing through the neighborhood. He turned toward the glowing windows, toward the family who had left his grandson to freeze while they feasted. His voice came low but steady, carrying the weight of years, of love, of fury sharpened into resolve. You left him out to die. 6 words, and if anyone inside had heard them, they would have felt the air shift. They thought he would turn around, go back to his truck, and disappear into the night. They didn't know Henry had come to stay. They didn't know he was about to burn their lies down. The wipers dragged back and forth across Henry's windshield, smearing half-frozen sleet into thin streaks of water. The back roads shimmered under a glassy coat of ice, every curve demanding both hands steady on the wheel. In the passenger seat, 2 gifts sat neatly wrapped in silver paper. One a model train set for Liam, the other a wool scarf his daughter Clara had admired last fall. The truck's heater rattled against the cold, struggling to keep the cab warm, but Henry hardly noticed. His mind was full of Evelyn. She used to ride beside him on nights like this, humming along to the radio, insisting they keep a thermos of hot cocoa between them, just in case. Her favorite phrase, "family first," was what drove him through weather most men would avoid. She had believed it with every breath, and he had tried to live by it, even now, a year after she was gone. The seat where she should have been sat empty, and the silence weighed heavier than the storm itself. As the tires crunched over a patch of hardened snow, Henry's thoughts slid back to the Christmas before, the last one Evelyn had lived to see. Liam had been quieter than usual, sitting at the edge of the living room, rather than sprawled in the middle of torn wrapping paper like a boy his age should. When someone dropped a pan in the kitchen, the sharp clatter made him flinch so violently that Evelyn had reached for his hand, her eyes full of quiet worry. Henry had noticed, too, but he'd brushed it off as nerves, maybe school stress, maybe just the awkwardness of growing up. Now, in the cab alone, those small memories pressed harder, sharper, and he wondered why he hadn't asked more questions. The roads narrowed as he left the highway behind, curving past barns and long fences dusted white. In the glow of the dashboard lights, his reflection looked older than he felt. Lines etched deeper since Evelyn's passing, his jaw tighter from carrying grief without sharing it. But tonight, he told himself, would be better. Clara had sounded almost cheerful on the phone earlier in the week, saying Liam was helping decorate the tree. That was enough to kindle a cautious hope inside him. Henry adjusted his grip on the wheel and whispered aloud, as though Evelyn sat beside him to hear it. This year will be better. Saying the words made them feel more solid, as though he could will the storm outside into silence and the unease in his chest into calm. The wrapped packages rustled as the truck hit another bump, reminding him of the promises he still meant to keep, the promise of family, the promise of showing up no matter what. Christmas lights began to appear along the roadside houses, blurred halos through the icy curtain, each one like a small beacon against the black December sky. Families were gathering, laughter rising behind glass, warmth spilling from chimneys. Henry pressed the accelerator gently, eager to arrive, eager to step back into that circle of belonging. The tires gripped, then slipped, then caught again, and he kept his eyes forward. As he turned onto Maple Hollow Lane, the road narrowed to little more than a frozen ribbon cutting through tall pines. He remembered Evelyn's voice telling him to slow down here, to take care. He smiled faintly, easing the truck back to 30. She wasn't gone, not really, not as long as her voice lingered in his memory. He carried her with him, even now. The house came into view at the end of the cul-de-sac, lights glowing against the snow, a fire flickering. Behind the windows, Henry's chest loosened as relief washed through him. This year would be different. Liam would smile again. The house would echo with something other than strained silence. For a fleeting moment, Henry believed it. He gripped the wheel tighter, whispered again, "This year will be better." He didn't yet know those words were a prayer about to be tested and broken in ways he could never have imagined. The snow crunched under Henry's boots as he stepped out of the truck, the wrapped gifts still sitting on the passenger seat. His breath fogged the air in sharp bursts, but what froze him wasn't the cold. It was the sight of Liam sitting hunched on the front steps. The boy's arms were crossed over his chest, his thin shirt already damp with melting flakes. His lips were tinged blue, and his small shoulders shook with each shallow breath. "Liam," Henry called softly, but his voice came out rough, full of disbelief. He tore off his heavy coat and draped it over the boy's trembling frame, pulling it tight around him. The child's body was so cold, it shocked Henry through the wool. He crouched down, gripping Liam's icy hands in his own. "What on earth are you doing out here?" Liam's eyes lifted slowly, relief and fear warring in them. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not allowed inside." The words struck Henry harder than the winter wind. "Not allowed?" His tone cracked. "Who told you that?" "Mom and Wilbur," Liam muttered, staring down at his knees. "I spilled cocoa on the carpet this morning. Wilbur said I ruined Christmas already. He said I had to stay outside and learn my lesson." Henry felt his pulse thunder in his ears. His mind flashed through years of missed signals, the flinches, the quiet voice on phone calls, the way Clara brushed off his questions with tight smiles. He had believed her when she said Liam was just being dramatic. Now the truth sat shivering in front of him, punished like a criminal for an accident any child could have made. "How long?" Henry asked, though dread already twisted in his gut. Liam hesitated, then whispered, "Since before lunch." Around 11, Henry checked his watch. A few minutes past 3. More than 4 hours in sub-freezing weather. The reality seared through him. This wasn't discipline. This was cruelty. His chest tightened with rage so sharp it felt like it might split him in two. Behind the frosted windows, Henry could see the glow of firelight, shadows moving, hear faint laughter from inside. Clara, Wilbur, and the others were warm, full-bellied, celebrating Christmas Eve, while a boy sat outside, shivering in the snow. The sight burned into him like a brand. Henry pulled Liam to his feet, supporting him as the boy swayed from weakness. "You're coming with me to the truck. We'll warm you up." You should never, ever have been out here. His voice was low, but steel edged every word, as he guided his grandson. Across the yard, Henry's thoughts raced. Evelyn's voice echoed from memory. Family first. How had Clara twisted that? How had she let this happen to her own son? Every ignored phone call, every excuse about Liam being busy or grounded, now snapped into focus. He had wanted to believe the best, wanted to trust his daughter's judgment, but trust had blinded him, and Liam had been paying the price. Inside the truck, Henry blasted the heater, tucking another blanket from the emergency kit around Liam. He rubbed his grandson's hands, trying to restore circulation. The boy's teeth chattered too hard for words at first, but eventually he whispered, "Please, Grandpa, don't tell them you saw me. It'll only make it worse." That plea, small, terrified, ignited something deep inside Henry. His rage hardened into resolve. This wasn't the first time. The bruises he had brushed off, the quiet phone calls, the way Liam's smile had faded each year, all of it added up to this moment. Clara and Wilbur had crossed a line that could never be erased. Through the windshield, Henry stared at the house glowing with false warmth. Every strand of tinsel, every flicker of firelight now looked like a stage set built to hide rot underneath. His hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. He whispered to himself, the words bitter but certain, "No more excuses. No more silence." Liam leaned against him, still trembling under the heavy coat. Henry wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders and held him close, his jaw set. This Christmas Eve would not be remembered for laughter or gifts. It would be remembered as the night lies burned and the truth finally forced its way inside. Henry kept the truck's heater on high, but even as the warmth filled the cab, the sight of Liam's small frame, wrapped in his oversized coat, made his chest ache. The boy's cheeks were red from windburn, but when Henry gently adjusted the collar, he saw more than just the cold. A faint shadow along Liam's jawline caught his eye, purplish, yellow at the edges. It wasn't the mark of winter. It was a bruise. Henry's hand froze in place. He tilted Liam's chin softly, careful not to alarm him. "Son," he said, voice low and steady. "Where did this come from?" Liam pulled away slightly, tugging the coat higher. "It's nothing. Nothing doesn't leave marks like that," Henry replied. His eyes shifted to Liam's wrists, where the sleeves had ridden up. There, too, he saw dark bands, the kind that came from pressure, not accidents. "Talk to me, Liam." The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Sometimes Wilbur gets mad. If I spill something or forget a chore, he grabs me, says I need to feel consequences." Henry gripped the steering wheel so hard it creaked. He forced himself to breathe evenly. "And your mother? Claire sees this? She says it's just discipline, that he's trying to make me stronger. She tells me to be quiet and do better next time." Liam's voice cracked, and his small hands twisted the blanket in his lap. "She says all dads are like that." The words cut Henry deeper than the cold air ever could. Evelyn's voice echoed in his memory. Family first. His daughter had taken that promise and buried it under silence, letting Wilbur twist it into torment. "Tell me everything," Henry said. Liam's eyes darted toward the glowing house, fear shadowing his expression. Then, as if releasing a dam, he spoke in halting bursts. "He locks me in the garage sometimes, says the dark will make me think. Last month he didn't let me eat for 2 days because I forgot to shovel the driveway. And, at dinner, I'm not allowed to talk unless he asks me a question. If I do, he sends me to bed without food." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, steadying the storm inside him. This wasn't discipline. This was systematic breaking down of a child, a slow erasure of joy, confidence, and dignity. He opened his eyes, meeting Liam's with unwavering steadiness. "You listen to me," Henry said, voice calm but edged with steel. That is not normal. That is not love. And you are not the problem. But Mom says, Henry cut him off gently but firmly. Your mother is wrong. She's blinded, maybe scared, but she is wrong. No child deserves to be treated this way. The boy's lip trembled. For a moment, Henry saw both the child he once bounced on his knee and the young man he was becoming, trapped between fear and the faint hope of rescue. Henry reached over, wrapping his hands around Liam's cold fingers. I should have seen this sooner. I should have fought harder when I noticed the signs, but I promise you now, it ends tonight. The boy stared at him, uncertainty flickering across his face. He'll be angry if you say anything. Henry's jaw tightened. Let him be angry. I've weathered worse storms. What matters is that he never lays a hand on you again. Silence settled between them, heavy but filled with unspoken resolve. Inside the house, laughter and clinking glasses carried on, oblivious. Outside, in the warmth of the truck, Henry's decision crystallized. His daughter's silence had chained Liam to suffering. Henry would not add his own silence to that weight. He looked once more at the bruises, at the boy clutching his coat, and made a vow. The night would not end with Liam back on those steps. The truth would be dragged into the light, no matter who tried to hide it. Henry's boots crunched on the snow as he lifted Liam into his arms. The boy's weight was light, too light, as though months of skipped meals had hollowed him out. Henry's coat swallowed him whole, and still he trembled, head tucked against his grandfather's shoulder. Each step toward the glowing house sharpened Henry's fury. He could see the shadows of people moving beyond the curtains, hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the muffled strains of carols playing from a speaker inside. Warmth and abundance sat just beyond that door, while his grandson had been left to freeze outside like an unwanted stray. He paused at the foot of the porch, heart pounding. For a moment, Evelyn's face rose in his mind, her voice calm and steady. Family first. He had lived by that creed. He had forgiven. He had overlooked. But tonight he understood that forgiveness without boundaries was surrender, and surrender was what had nearly broken this boy. Henry adjusted his grip on Liam and climbed the steps. The front door loomed before him, wreath hung neatly, a gold ribbon fluttering in the winter wind. He tried the handle. Locked, of course. The laughter inside swelled, cruel in its indifference. Henry set his jaw. Not anymore, he muttered. Then his boot connected with the wood beside the latch. Years of factory work had kept his legs strong. The impact splintered the frame, and the door burst inward, banging against the wall with a crack that silenced the music. The room froze. Inside, the dining table gleamed with silverware and crystal. A fire crackled in the hearth. Candles flickered along the centerpiece of holly and pine cones. At the head of the table, Victor sat with a carving knife poised above the roast, his shirt crisp, his expression confident, until his eyes landed on Henry, standing in the doorway, coat torn, snow swirling behind him, Liam shivering in his arms. Claire sat to Victor's right, her dress elegant, her smile brittle. The chatter of cousins and in-laws had died mid-sentence. Forks clattered onto plates. The only sound was the hiss of the fire and the echo of the door still rattling in its hinges. Henry stepped forward, boots dripping melted snow onto the polished floor. The contrast was almost obscene. The warmth of the room, the scent of roasted meat and cinnamon pie, against the boy in his arms whose lips were still tinged blue. He didn't bother with greetings. His voice carried like thunder across the stunned silence. You left him out to die. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Victor set down the carving knife with deliberate slowness, eyes narrowing. Henry, he said evenly, what on earth are you doing here? Henry ignored him, lowering Liam gently into a chair near the fire. The boy huddled, clutching the coat tighter. Every relative's gaze turned to him, confusion mixing with unease. Henry straightened, shoulders broad, presence filling the room. "He has been outside for 4 hours," Henry said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "No coat, no food, no warmth. While you sit here in comfort." Claire's lips parted, trembling. "Dad, please, not now." "Not now?" Henry's words cracked like a whip. "When, Claire?" "After the cold finished what your silence started?" Victor rose slowly, pushing back his chair with a scrape that grated in the charged silence. He was taller than Henry, heavier too, but the confidence in his posture faltered under the older man's gaze. "This is my house," Victor said, his tone clipped. "And you don't get to storm in here, kicking down doors, making wild accusations in front of my family." Henry stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Accusations?" "Look at the boy." He pointed toward Liam, whose small frame shook even as he pressed closer to the fire. "That's not an accusation. That's evidence." The cousins shifted uneasily in their seats. One of the aunts whispered something, then fell silent when Henry's glare swept the room. Claire rose now, wringing her hands. "Dad, it was punishment." "He spilled cocoa on the carpet this morning," Victor thought. "Punishment?" Henry cut her off. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You call this punishment? Freezing a child until his lips turn blue? Making him so hungry his wrists look like sticks? Locking him in garages and starving him at your table? I call that abuse." Victor's jaw tightened, but his voice carried that false calm of a man used to control. "You're exaggerating. He needed to learn responsibility. You coddled him too much, Henry. Someone has to make him a man." Henry's fist clenched at his side. He took another step, their faces inches apart now. "You don't make a man by breaking a boy. You don't teach responsibility by crushing spirit. You're no teacher. You're a coward who hides cruelty behind discipline." The words rippled through the room like a wave. Claire sank back into her chair, pale as the snow outside. Relatives glanced at one another, no one daring to move. The fire popped, a candle guttered, and still the silence held. Liam's voice broke it, fragile, halting. "Grandpa's telling the truth." Every head turned. The boy's eyes glistened, but his voice carried a thread of resolve. "He locks me in the garage. He makes me skip meals. Mom knows. She just says, 'It's discipline.'" His hands tightened around the coat. "I tried to be good, but nothing I do is enough." Henry's heart ached at the confession, but he placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've always been enough, son." Always Victor's composure cracked, his face flushing red. "This is my home, my rules, and I won't have some bitter old man undermining me in front of my family." Henry's voice turned cold as steel. "This isn't about your rules. It's about a child's safety, and I will not stand by while you destroy him." The standoff stretched, breathless and taut. Victor squared his shoulders. Henry didn't move. Around them, the warmth of the decorated room seemed to curdle. Luxury turned grotesque against the truth now burning in its center. Finally, Henry spoke again, softer but deadlier for it. "You thought I'd see him shivering and turn back. You thought I'd keep quiet like Claire. But you were wrong. Tonight, Victor, your lies burn." The room seemed to exhale all at once. Gasps, murmurs, the clink of a fork dropped nervously. Liam leaned into Henry's side, eyes wide but filled with something new. Hope. The door hung broken behind them, cold air pouring in. The warmth of family had been shattered, and the battle line was drawn. Henry didn't care about the roast cooling on the table or the wine half filled in glasses. He cared about one thing only, the boy at his side. And tonight, no man, no silence, no house of lies would take him away again. The table still glimmered with decorations, but the atmosphere had curdled into tension sharp enough to slice through. Henry stood firm near the fireplace, Liam wrapped in his coat beside him. Across the polished table, Victor's jaw was set, his knife and fork abandoned, but his posture rigid with authority. "My house, my rules," Victor said finally, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "That boy lives here under my roof. What I say goes?" Henry didn't flinch. His reply was clear, cold, and cutting. "Your rules nearly killed my grandson." Gasps moved through the room like a gust of wind. A few guests shifted uneasily, exchanging whispers, but none dared speak loudly. The warmth of the room had turned hostile, and every candle flicker now seemed to illuminate betrayal rather than celebration. Claire stood slowly, hands twisting together. Her voice wavered. "Dad, please, don't ruin Christmas." "Not like this." Henry turned toward her, his eyes burning. "Don't ruin Christmas?" "Claire, your son was outside for 4 hours in the snow. 4 hours. His lips are still blue." "And you're worried about Christmas dinner?" Claire faltered, her shoulders sagging, but she didn't speak again. Henry leaned down gently and touched Liam's wrist. The boy hesitated, then pulled back the sleeve. The faint bruises glared under the firelight, rings of shadowed skin where small bones met the grasp of larger hands. Henry turned to the room. "These," he said, his voice raw, "are not accidents. They're not lessons. They're evidence." Liam lowered his eyes, but his trembling hands betrayed his shame. Henry pressed further, lifting the boy's chin to reveal the discoloration along his jawline. "Look at him. You all see it. You sat here and ignored it, but you cannot look away now." Victor barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. "That's discipline. You call it bruises, I call it correction. Boys who don't learn respect end up worthless. He'll thank me one day." Henry's face hardened. "Thank you? For hunger? For bruises? For frostbite?" He leaned closer, his voice steady but thunderous. "That's not correction, Victor. That's cowardice dressed as discipline." The guests were silent now, their whispers dead, their eyes darting between the two men. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others looked away entirely. No one raised a voice to defend Victor. Henry straightened, pulling Liam to his side once more. His next words carried the weight of judgment. "You have one chance, Victor. One chance to apologize to this boy, to show him he's worth more than your cruelty. If you don't, then tonight you face what's coming." Victor sneered, puffing his chest, but there was a crack in his bravado. His eyes darted to the broken door, to the faces around the table that no longer held admiration, but unease. The silence pressed down heavy, waiting for his choice. Henry didn't waver. Apologize, or lose everything you think you've built. The room seemed to hold its breath. Henry's voice cut the silence in the dining room like a blade. "Liam, go upstairs and get your things. You're leaving with me tonight." The boy blinked, startled. His thin shoulders hunched as if expecting Victor to bark orders, but Henry's grip on his hand was firm. "Now," Henry said softly, the kind of tone that brooked no argument. The room stayed frozen as Henry guided Liam toward the staircase. Victor spat out, "You can't just take him." But no one moved to stop them. The tension followed them up each creaking step. At the top, Henry paused as Liam hesitated outside a narrow door at the end of the hall. The boy pushed it open to reveal a small, cold room. The air inside was sharp with chill, the window sealed with condensation, and Henry noticed immediately. No heat vent, just bare walls, a thin mattress, and a blanket that looked more suited for autumn than winter. "This is where you sleep?" Henry asked, voice low with disbelief. Liam nodded quickly, almost ashamed. "He makes me stay here when I mess up. Says it builds character." Henry ran his hand across the cold windowsill, fury tightening his jaw. It's a punishment cell, not a bedroom. Liam knelt by the dresser, pulling out a worn sweatshirt and stuffing it into a duffel bag. Don't take too much, he whispered. He'll accuse me of stealing. Henry bent, steadying the boy's trembling hands. Take what matters to you. We won't come back. The sound of hurried steps filled the hallway. Claire appeared, eyes wide, her voice a desperate plea. Dad, please, don't do this. You'll tear this family apart. Henry turned, his face etched with sorrow and anger. Family? Is that what you call this? He gestured at the barren room. Your son has been living like a prisoner, and you stood by and let it happen. Claire's lip trembled. You don't understand, Victor. Liam's voice broke through, clear and trembling. If you loved me, you wouldn't let this happen. He clutched the bag to his chest, his small voice carrying more weight than all the excuses in the world. Claire's hands dropped to her sides, her mouth working without sound. Henry put his arm around Liam. It ends tonight. Together, they walked down the stairs. The front door still hung crooked from where Henry had forced it open. Snow blew in through the gap, swirling into the warmth of the house, scattering pine needles across the floor. The laughter and music were gone now, replaced by the hollow rush of wind. Henry pulled the door wide. Come on, son. Liam stepped into the night, his breath mixing with the snow. And with that, Henry led him out, not just of the house, but out of the cage he had been trapped in. The knock came just past 9 o'clock, sharp and relentless, rattling the frame of Henry's front door. He'd just settled Liam into the guest room with an extra quilt when the pounding started again. The boy stiffened, eyes wide, fear etched deep in his face. Henry rose slowly, a man bracing for a storm, and went to the door. 2 uniformed police officers stood on his porch, snowflakes clinging to their jackets. Behind them, at the edge of the porch light, loomed Victor, red-faced and puffed up like a man ready to claim victory. Claire trailed behind, pale and wrung out, wringing her hands as if unsure which side to stand on. Mr. Whitaker? The older officer asked. We need to speak with you about a report filed this evening. Victor stepped forward before Henry could reply. That old man kidnapped my stepson, he barked, broke into my house, dragged him away. He's poisoning the boy against his real family. Henry didn't flinch. Kidnapped? His voice was low but steady. I found my grandson sitting outside in the snow for 4 hours. No coat, no food. On Christmas Eve. The younger officer glanced between them, then said, We'll need to hear from Liam directly. Henry turned, calling gently, Son, come here. Liam appeared in the hallway, Henry's oversized flannel shirt draped over him, the sleeves rolled 3 times. He looked smaller than ever, but his voice carried. He left me outside, Liam said, pointing at Victor, since noon, because I spilled cocoa on the carpet. His lips trembled, but he forced the words out. Grandpa didn't kidnap me. He saved me. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow piling on the porch. Victor's laugh was harsh. He's exaggerating. I was disciplining him. Kids today need tough love, not coddling. The officer's eyes narrowed. Discipline doesn't usually involve hypothermia. Claire broke then. Her voice cracked as tears spilled. It's true. He's locked Liam in the garage before, made him skip meals. I stayed quiet because I was afraid. But it's been happening for years. Victor spun toward her, betrayal flashing in his eyes. You ungrateful. Enough, the senior officer snapped. He turned to Victor. Sir, you're under arrest for child endangerment and abuse. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. The handcuffs clicked. Victor sputtered, protesting, but his voice sounded smaller now, swallowed by the cold air and the finality of steel on his wrists. Henry placed a steady hand on Liam's shoulder. The boy pressed closer, watching as Victor was led to the squad car. Claire sobbed quietly, her hands shaking, but she didn't interfere. Henry spoke, his voice carrying in the winter night. Justice doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it kicks the door in. The officers escorted Victor into the dark, and the house behind Henry glowed warm with the promise of safety at last. Snow still lingered on the ground in patches, crusted and gray where the sun hadn't reached, when the weeks after Victor's arrest slowly gave way to a new kind of rhythm in Henry's house. What had once been his quiet refuge had become a home full of footsteps and voices again. Claire and Liam moved in temporarily, bringing suitcases, boxes, and a heaviness that hung in the air but softened day by day. The divorce papers were already filed, the legal machinery grinding forward. Claire spent long hours at the kitchen table, papers spread out, her pen moving in bursts, then stopping as she stared at nothing. Henry gave her space, knowing she had to untangle her life in her own way. Liam, on the other hand, slipped into the new routine like a plant bending toward sunlight. The first morning, Henry found him in the kitchen with a mug of cocoa, marshmallows dissolving on the surface. His hands cupped the mug like he'd never really been warm before. "Grandpa, do you drink cocoa too?" he asked. Henry chuckled, made himself one, and sat across the table. That small act became their ritual. Every evening after dinner, cocoa for both of them, with Liam talking about school or homework, and Henry listening, occasionally telling a story from his days at the mill. The boy's shoulders relaxed more with each passing week. He laughed again, a sound Henry realized he hadn't heard in years. It started small, chuckles when Henry burned toast or when their old dog tripped over a rug, but grew into full-bodied laughter when they watched movies together. School began to stabilize too. Liam, once withdrawn, began raising his hand in class. Teachers called Claire to say they saw improvement. At night, when the house was quiet, Henry sometimes sat in his chair by the window, watching the snow fall and thinking of Evelyn. She had been gone 3 years, but her voice was still in his ear. She always said, "Family first, no matter how hard it gets." He whispered to the empty room, "You'd be proud I stood up." He could almost imagine her smile in return, that soft nod of approval she gave when he finally did something right after hesitating too long. The guest room became Claire's space, and Henry rearranged his study for Liam. He brought in a real desk, hung shelves, and even put up one of Evelyn's old quilts on the wall to make it feel warmer. Liam would sit at the desk, headphones on, scribbling math equations or sketching little superhero figures. Henry would peek in sometimes, and Liam would grin, not hiding his work like before. Sundays turned into family days. They cooked pancakes, played cards, and sometimes went to the park even if it was cold. Claire began to shed the look of someone always braced for impact. She started humming while washing dishes, something Henry hadn't heard since she was a girl. Slowly, the house began to breathe again. Divorce proceedings dragged, as they always did. Victor fought every detail, sending sharp letters through lawyers, but Claire stood firm. Henry sat beside her in court once, watching her speak with a steady voice about the years of abuse she had ignored, the cost of silence, and why she would not return. Henry's chest swelled with pride. She was no longer the timid daughter who let Victor dictate her life. She was becoming her mother's daughter again, resilient and unafraid. For Liam, the change was clearer than words. He slept through the night without nightmares. He ate with appetite instead of shrinking into himself. One evening, as they sat with cocoa in hand, Liam said quietly, "It feels normal here." Henry looked at him and answered simply, "That's how it's supposed to feel." Henry knew challenges lay ahead. There would be custody hearings, financial worries, and Victor's shadow still trying to stretch across their lives. But for now, what mattered was that Liam was safe, warm, and smiling. The sound of that laughter carried Evelyn's echo. She would have wanted this, her family safe, her grandson protected, her daughter finally free. Henry leaned back in his chair one evening, watching Liam play with the dog on the living room floor. He sipped his cocoa slowly and felt something rare but familiar: peace. After all the storms, the house had finally become a home again. 4 months passed, and spring finally pushed its way through the last crust of winter. Henry's small house felt different now, filled not with the silence of loss, but with the steady rhythm of renewal. The mantel in the living room told the story at a glance. New family photos stood among the older ones. There was Liam holding his acceptance letter to an early college program for engineering, his grin stretching from ear to ear. Another showed Claire and Liam at the park, wind in their hair, a moment that looked unforced and light. The old photo of Evelyn still had its place at the center, but now it was surrounded by signs of life moving forward. Liam spent his mornings with books and applications, his afternoons tinkering with small projects at the desk Henry had set up for him. He'd taken apart the old toaster one weekend just to see how it worked, then put it back together with a proud smile. Henry would watch him, thinking how Evelyn had always believed the boy had a mind built for building. Now, with encouragement and a safe space, that belief was taking shape. Claire grew stronger too. She had found steady work at the local library and began counseling sessions twice a week. At first, she came home exhausted, drained from digging through years of silence and compromise, but over time, Henry noticed a shift. She stood straighter. She laughed more easily. She no longer avoided mirrors. Her resilience was becoming visible, brick by brick, as she rebuilt herself. Their healing showed best in the small rituals. They ate dinner together every night, even if it was just soup and sandwiches. Afterward, they played board games at the kitchen table, the same way Henry and Evelyn once had with Claire when she was young. On weekends, they tended the garden in the backyard. Liam loved turning the soil, asking Henry endless questions about fertilizer, seeds, and sunlight. Claire planted flowers along the fence, saying the colors reminded her of the summers she thought she'd lost. In the quiet evenings, Henry often sat with his cocoa, listening to Liam talk about gears and circuits, while Claire hummed softly in the kitchen. The house had changed. It no longer carried the weight of despair. It breathed again, alive with the kind of ordinary happiness that felt like a miracle. Henry knew Evelyn would be proud, not only of Liam's achievements or Claire's strength, but of the way they had found their way back to each other. Henry often found himself awake in the quiet hours of the night, when the house was still and the clock in the hallway ticked with the patience of time itself. Those were the moments when reflection settled over him like a familiar blanket, and he replayed everything that had led them here. He would look at the new photographs on the mantel, the laughter captured in frames, and think about the price that had been paid to reach this peace. What lingered most in his mind wasn't Victor's cruelty or even Claire's complicity. It was the silence. That suffocating silence that had almost broken Liam, and that silence Evelyn had always warned him about. Silence is not love, she used to say. Boundaries are. Henry had never understood the depth of that lesson until now. He thought about all the excuses Claire had given over the years, the way she brushed off bruises, the way she allowed Victor to speak for her. She believed, perhaps, that keeping quiet preserved the family. But it hadn't. Silence had enabled a man who thrived on domination, and it had nearly destroyed her son. Love doesn't look like turning away. Love doesn't look like hoping things will get better while a child suffers. Love requires stepping into the storm, even if it means facing conflict head-on. Henry realized his silence had played a part too. He had seen flashes of unease in Liam long before Christmas Eve. The way the boy flinched when someone raised their voice, the way he laughed nervously when questions cut too close. Henry had chosen not to pry, convincing himself it was better not to stir family tension. But love that stays silent in the face of harm is not love at all. It is surrender, and it is complicity. That was the truth Evelyn had always tried to impress upon him. Now, sitting with a second chance, Henry felt both guilt and gratitude woven together. He couldn't undo the nights Liam had spent locked away or the hours shivering in the cold, but he could make sure the boy never felt abandoned again. He could give him a home where warmth was unconditional, where mistakes were met with guidance rather than cruelty. In every cup of hot cocoa he placed in Liam's hands, in every small ritual of safety they built together, Henry tried to rewrite the story silence had left behind. Claire's transformation deepened this realization. For years, she had thought submission was protection. She had told herself endurance was strength. But watching her grow into someone who chose truth over appearances, who finally stood between her son and the man who abused him, reminded Henry of the difference between endurance and courage. Endurance bears the pain, courage stops it. And courage is born from love, not fear. The lesson burned clear. Enabling an abuser never shields a child, it sharpens the knife. Every compromise, every brushed-off excuse, every silence feeds the cycle. And cycles only break when someone finally says no. Henry had been that someone, but only because he carried Evelyn's voice with him. Boundaries are love. Without them, families rot from the inside out. What struck Henry most was how resilient Liam remained. Despite years of cruelty, the boy still laughed, still dreamed, still worked toward a future. It would have been easier for him to turn bitter, but instead, he leaned toward light. That resilience was a gift, and Henry knew he had to protect it. Every boundary he held firm now wasn't just about keeping Victor away. It was about preserving that hope inside Liam, ensuring he never mistook silence for care again. Henry often repeated one final truth to himself, the one Evelyn's memory always circled back to. Family isn't about blood. It's about who protects you when no one else will. Blood ties hadn't saved Liam. His own mother's silence had nearly cost him everything. What saved him was a boundary drawn by someone who refused to let silence speak louder than love. As Henry closed his eyes in those quiet hours, he felt Evelyn close by. He imagined her nodding in approval, proud not because he had fought, but because he had finally understood. Love is loud when it needs to be. Love is a shield. Love demands boundaries. And in that truth, Henry found peace. If you found your grandchild locked outside on Christmas, shivering in the cold, would you walk away, or would you kick down the door? That is the question at the heart of this story. Henry made his choice. He chose to stand up, to protect, and to show that silence is never love when a child is suffering. But what would you do in his place? I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you risk family conflict to save someone you love, or would you hope things resolved quietly? Your perspective matters, and your voice may help someone else find the courage to act when silence feels easier. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice. Every like and comment helps this community grow, and every subscription ensures you never miss the next chapter. And speaking of the next chapter, stay tuned. In our upcoming video, we'll reveal the chilling moment when a man discovered his will had been rewritten behind his back without his consent. You won't want to miss it.